a lot of people, I guess, don't understand this in the First Nation space. But I think we have to be conscious of the intergenerational lack of finance. We don't have ancestors that we've been able to build wealth around that can actually support us in actually moving forward. We don't have, generally, we don't have parents or grandparents or great-grandparents who've been allowed to build any type of wealth that can be leveraged as generations move forward, because our history is not that. And I think that most people don't realise that history.
Hello and welcome. I'm Elizabeth Formosa, the founder of Fashion Equipped and devourer of all things fashion, business and mindset. In this podcast, I'm speaking with thought leaders, change makers and entrepreneurs about the business side of fashion and everything in between. Fashion Business Mindset is your front row seat to real stories from designers, brands, entrepreneurs, makers and mentors. We'll discuss how to launch and grow a fashion business and give you insider access to the future of fashion. So let's do this together and ensure that you're equipped to make the fashion business your business. Welcome back to Fashion Business Mindset. I'd like to begin today's episode by acknowledging the traditional owners of country throughout Australia and recognising the continued connection to lands, waters and communities. We pay our respects to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Island cultures and to elders past, present and emerging. On today's episode, I am delighted to welcome Denni Francisco, the founder of Ngali. Denni is a fashion entrepreneur and proud Wiradjuri woman with over 25 years' experience in the industry. Denni has created a number of unique clothing business models that have made an impact not only to the industry, but to community at large. Her latest endeavour, Ngali, brings the artwork of talented Indigenous Australians to the world through premium quality clothing and collectibles. She works with First Nations artists to expand their reach, honour their stories, and help promote understanding between First Nations communities and others. Ngali has achieved many milestones, and today we dive into those as we explore the First Nations fashion landscape and so much more. I loved every minute of my chat with Denni, and no doubt you will too. So let's dive in. Denni, welcome to the Fashion Business Mindset podcast.
Thank you. So great to be here.
So great to have you. Now, Denni, before we dive into all things Ngali, can you set the scene for our audience and just share a little bit about yourself and some insights into your journey before launching your gorgeous brand?
Okay, I'm a proud Wiradjuri woman. I live in Naarm in Melbourne. I've been here all of my adult life, really. So born out on Tadarung country, but living here. I started Ngali in 2018, and I can't believe it's 5 years ago now.
That's amazing. Congratulations. Longevity in our industry is definitely a topic of conversation at the moment. But what about your background before going into the fashion industry?
Yeah, so I had I've got a bit of a history in fashion. I worked in America for a little while as a fashion director come forecaster. Yeah. Then I played around and doing some of my own screen printing and making garments in muslin fabrics. And then I started a children's wear brand called Billy Cart Clothing, which a lot of people still know about.
Yes.
When my daughter was 3. I started making clothes for her, and then that evolved into creating a children's clothing company. After we closed that business, I worked in the corporate sector around, I guess you'd call it resilience training, taking care of people who are taking care of business around how we manage our physical, emotional, mental and spiritual energy. And I did that for about 12 years. but I was really missing a couple of the important things in my life, which was I was missing the creativity, but more importantly, I was feeling that I wasn't making the best contribution to my community. And because I had that history in fashion, I thought that maybe fashion was the way to go to address both of those things.
Yes, well, we're glad that you took that next step. But Billy Cart Clothing, iconic, iconic. How many years did you run the kids' clothing brand for?
Well, that was about 12 years as well,
Wow.
because we started, as I said, when Ashlyn was 3, and we closed it when she was, yeah, just over 12. So maybe it was closer to 10 years. Yeah.
Yeah, amazing. So you're certainly not new to this. And I loved when I did look into your professional background, I loved that you had been working in the professional and personal development space. Certainly a passion of mine. And no doubt those skills that you acquired during that experience would be serving you well now with what you're doing. So I'm sure we'll dive into that a little bit more when we talk about leadership and team. But let's dive into the brand story behind Ngali. So, can you share that with our audience and talk a little bit about the ethos and the values that are driving the brand?
Yeah, so our ethos and our mantra, I guess, is the Ngali together we create. Really have this incredible connection to collaboration, connectedness, togetherness, are things that can be achieved as a collective. And so a part of making a contribution to the community was just being really conscious of our remote artists, for example, who really sort of struggle in many ways to expand their reach. So it's really that they ship their paintings maybe to the city or to the regional areas for exhibitions, and then they take back things that maybe haven't sold, or it's a passive kind of process of getting people to the art centres where their paintings are showing. So for me, it was how could I support those artists by translating respectfully their artworks into fabric prints, and thereby expanding the reach of the artists, creating a passive income through royalties. So then being able to, we don't really tell the story of the artwork itself, and we don't translate the artwork exactly as it is, or we don't work with the artwork exactly as it is. We work with the artist to choose the artwork that I can see could be translated,
Yeah.
and we do that, and then the artist will agree with that, and there begins the journey of our story that starts out of the respect of their story, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And let's dive a little bit more into the artists and the amazing people that you collaborate with. But I love that. So together we create. So
Yes.
that's the heartbeat of the business. So it's not one set of hands, it's many sets of hands that are touching one of your beautiful pieces. And I see them as pieces of art. They're investment pieces. There's something that you would have in your wardrobe forever and a day. But let's talk about who's on the team. We'll circle back to the artists, but who's on the design team? I always love to share, the creative process behind a brand because so much goes on. It's so dynamic. You don't just click your fingers and, these beautiful collections are manifested. We'll start with who's on the team.
Yes, well, this will come as a surprise, because it will come as a surprise to most people. There's only myself and one other person in Ngali. And up until about 18 months ago, there was me and one part-time person, and that was it. So people kind of see Ngali and think, yes, it's a bigger company and
Yep.
so on. And certainly we've achieved, quite incredible things when you step back and look at it. But I really work to keep the business as simple as possible. And we do outsource things like, we outsource when we're working with a textile design, that can help me to translate those artworks into the textile designs that I want. We outsource for some administrative tasks, not all of them. We now have a marketing company that we work with. So we're still a very tiny internal team. As a small business, it's
I'm
somewhat challenging,
surprised.
but we get there.
I'm definitely surprised. You said we'd be surprised. I think, yes, myself and our audience will absolutely be surprised because, yeah, when you do look at Ngali, it feels like, there's 20 people behind the brand with all all of the amazing things that you're doing. So is it yourself, Denni? Are you the visionary in terms of being the creative director, like steering where the brand goes from a creative perspective? And what does your colleague do?
Yeah, so basically, yes, it is me as a creative director. So basically, if you look at I guess the Ngali silhouettes, our silhouettes are all very simple, and it might be that, for example, a shirt, and then we change the collar, or we change the cuff, or we make it a little different, different design of a pant, because it's the prints that are the heroes. So
Yes.
so really, and that's sort of the passion for me. So basically for me, it gets pretty exciting when I see an artwork and I think, gosh, I could see how we could translate that.
Yes.
And then we work on that. And then it's a matter of then getting that put into a fabric print. And often I have a sort of collection in my mind, but then you get the fabric back, and it's not unusual for that to swap around and go, oh no, I think I won't put that into that silhouette. I'm going to put that into that.
Yes.
So that's pretty much I guess it's how I see things. I see things in a really simple way. I've never been trained as a designer. I've not been to university or any of that. I really didn't have that opportunity when I was growing up. So it's really just seeing what's possible, and then of course working with pattern makers as well, and then of course our external manufacturers. But my colleague actually does a lot of what we would call business day-to-day things. Well, actually, she does everything like like we both do, but she'll work with our marketing team and our social media team. She'll work with stylists and so on. So she will work with stylists for who want to have products to show and to photograph for different stories. So we just do what it is that we need to do. We work also to, I think it's important with interns. We haven't for a while, but we've got 2 interns that we're working with at the moment. And I am always really conscious of how businesses work with interns and what the purpose is. So the purpose is for them to learn and for them to be able to take back to their studies something that's really useful. So generally we will work on projects for them. So before we would take in an intern, we'd probably have sort of like 2 or 3 projects that they could work on over a 12-week period. And that's generally things that it's on our wish list, but we haven't actually really got to do.
Yeah, I love that. I love that, when you're working with an intern, it's got to be mutually beneficial. There's got to be a sound learning for them, and obviously, something they can bring to the team. But what I'm hearing is it is a very lean team. So you're doing outstanding work. And as you said, of course, you've got your extended team that are your outsourced partners, whether that be in marketing or whether that be in manufacturing. But let's get to the heartbeat of the business. So you've mentioned the artwork, which is the hero. And you've mentioned you've got your core silhouettes. But what I love about your core silhouettes is they all have a designer edge. They've all got something different. So there's definitely a designer aesthetic coming through. But with the artwork, which is the hero, how do you go about the curation of that? Where do you find the artist? How do you choose the piece of artwork? Let's start there.
Well, yes, and it's probably a good place to start with that, because when I first had this idea and this concept of how do we support our artists, I went to the Darwin Art Fair. It was the second time I'd been there. It's the most amazing place, I think, for anybody who hasn't been there that's interested in Indigenous art should go. And I walked around for the first day just taking everything in because it's a huge area. The second day I walked past Warman Art Centre, an art centre from the Kimberley, and there were 2 paintings that just really stood out to me. And there was a man and woman sitting there, and I just said, could you tell me about these paintings? And Lindsay Malay stood up and said, they're both my paintings. And out of all of the incredible artwork in the room. And so anyway, we got together, we yarned together. I talked to him about what I was wanting to do, talked about the vision. He absolutely got it. We got on incredibly well right from the start. A couple of months later, I went out on country with his family. And so that began the journey. Now, initially, I thought that I would work with 1 artist a year, but I didn't take into account how long it takes to build up your business. So the royalties were pretty paltry. It wasn't that exciting. So I thought, Oh, I will keep going. And luckily, Lindsay's artwork is so amazing. It can be translated in so many different ways.
Yeah.
And it was great for him because he is what's considered to be an emerging artist with
Yeah.
the art centre. But then what happened? COVID happened. So then
Mm.
I was not able to get out on country to meet with any other artists and so on. So I kept working with Lindsay's work. And apart from the fact that we've worked now with one other artist who's not in fact remote at the moment, but is emerging in the art space and wants to take his business in that into the fashion area. But I've been able to work with Lindsay's art all the way through, but working to get back out on country now to start to work with more artists. But as you can imagine, with only 1.5 of us, or now 2 of us working in the
Yeah.
business, even getting out on country has been somewhat challenging. So we're
Yeah.
hoping that this year, the second half of this year, that's what will happen.
Yeah, I think it's great, isn't it, though, that there's been longevity there with Lindsay. It's always nice to have that longer term partnership. And as you
Yes.
said, make it meaningful to everyone involved as well. But essentially, what I'm hearing there is that you'll be handpicking the art along the way. So you're not really, it doesn't sound like you're working through an agency. You're basically on the ground, you're at the Darwin Art Fair, you're going to be possibly on country in the future, but it looks like you'll be handpicking the artist to work with, based on obviously an aesthetic that you feel will work well within your brand, Denni.
Yes, absolutely. That's what it is. It has to be something that and pretty much you can identify it pretty quickly. You
Yeah.
see something and it just calls to you in that way. And then it is a process because then it needs to be done really respectfully because of
Mm,
course every artwork is the artist's story and that is deeply personal.
yes.
So for us, it's like steady, steady. Like
Yeah.
there's a particular art centre that I would love to work with. 2 years I've just been taking these little steps, having these little conversations. We haven't kind of like got there yet, but we'll get there when the time is right, I guess. So all of that cultural, the cultural elements, the cultural safety, the cultural respect is really, really important. And that's, I think, what brings the magic to the brand as well.
Oh yeah, definitely. There's definitely magic there, that's for sure. You've made an important point there though, just in regards to establishing relationships, and sometimes it just doesn't happen overnight. It is a long journey. You've got to nurture a relationship to, again, get to the outcome that's going to work for both parties. So there's a lot of investment in time and relationship building that goes into a business model like this. So
Yes.
that's the artwork piece. And then I also know that, so that's basically the silhouettes that are celebrating the artwork. So that's the core of the collections. But I know that versatility, wearability, quality, longevity, they're all important points as part of your product ethos, I guess. How does that kind of translate to a physical garment?
I think we're always thinking of the journey, and so it comes back to that journey of relationships or the journey of collections.
Yeah.
So really, so I guess we sort of see it in a seamless way. So it's not that it would start and stop with a season,
Mm-hmm.
but it's really how does it just move from one season to the next somewhat seamlessly, so that whatever is in any collection can go with what's gone on before and what comes after it.
Yeah.
Because part of the sustainability concept is we don't need a lot of things.
Mm.
We just need things that are versatile enough for people to make their own, so that they can create their own looks. As part of that, together we create, so they can put different prints and different patterns and all of that together. Use our scarves in a whole lot of different ways
Yeah.
back with the garments. So I think that that's an attraction of the brand as well for customers.
Yeah, absolutely. I can see that. I can see that quality, the longevity and versatility, it's all part of the sustainability story.
Yeah.
I mean, conscious fashion is at the forefront of everything we do now, as businesses, or if it hasn't been historically, it needs to be now. There's a lot of catching up that a lot of brands need to do. But
Yeah.
in addition to those points we've already discussed, is there anything else that you're doing from a sustainability perspective? I'm assuming there's a lot of consideration around the raw materials that you're using, perhaps
Yes.
the dye stuff. Maybe talk us through those elements.
Yes, it was interesting in that when we started, we very much wanted to be as Australian made,
Yeah.
looking at how do we make a contribution also to the economy. What we found a couple of things was because our fabrics were printed overseas, then we had to ship them in, then we had to work out just how much of the fabric we needed and then have it manufactured here. And we had leftover fabrics. And yes, with the leftover fabrics, then we could look at, what else that we were going to do with them. So that was one part about just not making exactly, like well, just having leftover fabric
Yeah.
and looking at, how do we use it. And then also the other part was because of what we also too found was that our lead times were being pushed out and our minimum quantities were going up to meet the requirements of the local manufacturers here. And that was difficult as well because as a small brand and starting out, being pushed to do high minimums than we really believed we could be doing and should be doing and maybe able to sell, it made it really difficult. And then what happened was with our manufacturer who was doing our fabrics in China, and very, a really great company, very, with all of their ethical processes in place and so on, said, we could do your manufacturing. And I said, yes, but we're small and we wouldn't be able to meet your minimums. And he said, no, we really believe in what you're doing. So we will support you to do whatever quantities that you need to do, and then we'll grow together. And that was actually, just such an amazing opportunity for us. Their quality is fantastic. It keeps everything the same. We reduce our carbon footprint by not sending out, sending fabrics down, sending fabrics out to get manufactured. It all kind of like happens in the one place.
Yes.
But importantly, it also too gave us the opportunity to be able to expand our business into wholesale, because we were direct to consumer business, and manufacturing in Australia, sadly, meant that we would not be able to ever expand into wholesale, which also too meant we couldn't grow our business, we couldn't employ more people, we couldn't pay more royalties to our artists, we couldn't support our children's education more. It was actually quite restrictive, and it was a real kind of learning lesson and a flip of whether we see ourselves as being Australian made or an Australian brand.
Yeah.
And interestingly, for us to manufacture overseas, we make a better contribution to Australia, to the Australian economy. So
this is such an important topic of conversation. I just want to recap a few things there for our audience, because this is a discussion I have on a regular basis with my clients, with our industry. But let's just recap. So your previous model was you were basically having all of your fabrics made in China. They were being imported to Australia, and you had local manufacturers here in Australia making your products. You mentioned that you came across some challenges, which were at that time were high minimum order quantities. So the minimum order quantities were creeping up. So the local manufacturer was saying, Denni, you've got to order X, but you only wanted to order X. And so that was going to, therefore, if you would have gone down that path, not only would it have been very costly, but it potentially could have caused you more excess inventory, not just excess fabric, but excess ready-made garments sitting there that you had no guarantee that you could sell through. So obviously, as a strategic business owner wanting to reduce the risk in your business, you didn't want to go down that path without being able to have some validation that you're going to be able to sell through that quantity. So you needed to keep your order quantities down, and your China manufacturer offered you a solution. And said, we can do it all in-house, so you don't need to ship the fabric and have it made elsewhere. We can do this all in-house for you. And that China manufacturer ticked all of your boxes around sustainability or conscious, responsible business practices, let's call that.
Ethical manufacturing,
Yeah. And then the other point you mentioned was wholesale. So I think, again, for our audience, when you've mentioned if I would have kept my manufacturer here in Australia, it would have prevented me from going down the wholesale path. because what that means is that the margins that you were procuring, so the margin between the cost of goods here in Australia being made, so the cut, make and trim, finished product, to basically the margin between what you would have to sell from cost to wholesale price. And typically that's going to be 50, maybe 55% margin between the retail and the wholesale price. So that was not going to be possible for you due to the higher cost of goods. So
Yes,
you wouldn't have been able to have
and
a
therefore
wholesale business.
you couldn't sell the product to the consumer
Yes.
at a reasonable price. Yeah.
Yeah. What would you have had to have done? Like, did you do the costing or the modeling in terms of if you would have kept your manufacturing here in Australia and decided to wholesale, did you do the sums and say, well, actually, that would mean I would have to increase my prices by X? Was there a percentage that you did you do that analysis? I'm assuming you did some kind of analysis to say
Yes,
this
I
is.
did. Yes, I definitely did do that. I did do, if you're looking at what the margins are and then you look and you sort of say, gosh, you know what, if we do that,
Yeah.
because that was another way of looking that if we ended up having to produce more than what we really wanted to for our direct to consumer model, then the other option, of course, is well, taking that excess stock and looking at how then, do we wholesale that?
Yes.
But then there's a difference in timing for that as well, in terms of the timing for making for direct to consumer as opposed to making for into the future for future
Correct.
orders of wholesale.
Yeah.
So yes, I definitely looked at that and looked at well, we won't be able to sell it for that, or if we have it for or if the margin is not big enough, then the business is not viable.
Yeah.
So it wasn't really rocket science for me. Like just looking at it, just going, well, this is just impossible.
Yeah.
We have to go overseas.
I think it's an important point for our audience because I know that there's a lot of emerging designers that will tune in, and many of them have the desire to make in Australia. And we're not saying that it can't work, but it doesn't work for every business model. It's just like offshore may not be in line with some businesses. Ethos or, the path they want to go down. So it's important to do the analysis, not just the high level, we'd love to do this kind of analysis that's tied into brand values, but also the commercial side. So it's very important to understand the financials when you're going down this path to make sure it is going to be, you're going to have that pathway to profitability. And we know when a business is in the first few years, it is, you're building your margin and your cash flow and all of the things, but there's got to be a projection that this is going to work for the business at a point in time and it's going to be able to be profitable, which makes it sustainable, which means you can keep doing the beautiful things that you're doing. So I think for you, it's just an important message for our audience that you've had that moment in time where you've had to change your business model to actually have a future for the brand to keep going.
Yes, absolutely. And I think that what you're saying is so right in terms of, every business has to look at what's right for them. So that if there's somebody that's wanting to manufacture in Australia and they're going direct to the consumer, then, that's fine. If you're a big organization where you're doing, thousands and thousands of units, where you've got negotiation power with our local manufacturers, and our local manufacturers, have to charge those prices anyway. It's we're not being ripped off. It's actually just, that's the cost for them.
Correct.
So they have to make their businesses viable as well. And so I think it's, for every business really thinking about, what works for them and what's their vision, because some people may never want to go into wholesale. But generally, when I ask people, why do you say that you want Australian made? Without a doubt, most people say for employment. But for me, that's not the case, because if we can't grow our business, we can't employ people.
Yeah.
So, and I think that, we've come off, sort of like, and the back of, wanting to be Australian made. The other thing that consider is we have an incredible skill shortage in Australia now for manufacturing. So that makes it harder as well. And that pushes out the lead times and all of that. And of course, all of the people that are able, or the businesses that can do thousands of units and so on, they're going to get priority because that's also to what the manufacturer needs. So smaller businesses sort of like sit at the back of the line, and that happens as well. So but I think the other thing that's happened after we made that decision, a really good thing happened with Australian Fashion Council when they introduced the Australian fashion brand logo and so on. So we could identify Australian businesses that are Australian business fashion brands, and you need to fulfill 4 criteria in order to be able to qualify for that, which Ngali does. So that made me happy about that, because we can justifiably call ourselves an Australian fashion brand. Albeit that we manufacture overseas, but we bring something positive to the fashion and manufacturing, the fashion industry in Australia.
I love that. So how does that look consumer facing? So that's the Australian trademark. Is that a swing ticket? Like how do the consumers identify that?
Yes, it's a swing ticket that AFC are just implementing soonest, I think. So they've gone through the process of identifying businesses to start that, which happened last year, and now other businesses are actually applying for that to get accredited. And the last meeting that I was in, they're working to have all of the swing tags and so on finalised, so that we can add those to our products. So
I love that. I think again, it's just a nice validation of everything that you're doing. Let's talk about, thank you for sharing that, Denni. I think that was an important conversation, because I know a lot of people tuning in are sometimes torn, especially, around the local to offshore manufacturing. So I think that, sharing that information from your experience, on the front line, just helps others who are on their journey. But I'd love to talk about the Ngali customer. So by merging First Nations artwork and meaningful design ethos and sustainability ethics, your brand has certainly established a loyal following. Who is your customer, and what is attracting them to your beautiful brand?
I think you mentioned it before in terms of, there's so much conscious consumerism happening now. People want to make informed choices about the things that they invest in, and fashion is one of those things. Somebody actually said to me that Ngali stands out when you're scrolling through different brands. It stands out because of its prints. So I think the prints are the things that attract people, but then I think that the story behind those prints is what attracts people. I think that our customer is interested in the story. I think that they're interested in First Nations creativity, and I don't know for sure, but I do hope then that they can sort of see how that really works for them. And everything that we do is around comfort as well as longevity and so on. And when I first started, I thought our customer base would be 30 to 55. Turns out it's about 25 to about 70. So
everyone.
Yes, like there's always that joke in marketing when people say, "Oh, yes, my product goes to everybody," and you kind of, well, no, that's not going to be how it is. But we do have a diverse customer, but you can kind of start to see then the things that relate more to, the different age brackets within that cohort.
Where are your strongest sales coming from? Is it like a Melbourne-based customer, a Sydney-based customer? Is it people from overseas? Like when you look at the demographics maybe that are purchasing from you, or the locations even, where is it kind of weighted to?
It's definitely the East Coast and definitely more in Victoria, because more people probably know us, although that's starting to shift now. That's how it was, in the recent past, but it's starting to shift now. And we do get, and our international buying audience from e-commerce, comes out of Canada and the US and some from Scandinavia. But they're not big numbers yet. This is really around international clients finding us. So we're about to implement a wholesale international strategy, but we haven't implemented that yet. So maybe this time next year I might have more to say on that.
Love. And we're going to talk about marketing in a minute. So we'll dive a little bit more into how you connect with your customers. But before we do that, I'd love for you to just share some of the key milestones that Ngali's achieved along the journey. There's so many. You've won awards, you've been front and center on runways, but what are some of the key milestones that you're most proud of so far, Denni?
I guess a key milestone is that we're 5 years in and we're still here. I guess
Sure is.
that's probably a good one. But it was interesting when we won the National Indigenous Fashion Award, and we did win it 2 years in a row, and it was an interesting situation because it felt a little uncomfortable, and I didn't really quite know, sort of like how to deal with that. I'm a reasonably private person, so when you get sort of like put out there like that, it's a little hard. But when I told Lindsay, the artist, he was so super excited. So then I got happy about that. So that kind of made it easier. I think one of the big milestones was certainly, being the First Nation brand to show a solo runway at Australian Fashion Week. That was actually a pretty big thing. It was a pretty big thing because it was only about 2 years ago that Australian Fashion Week started to do Welcome to Country.
Yeah.
So, then a couple of years later to have a solo runway, it was, it was kind of like, yeah, we might have been the first, but how come it hadn't happened sooner was my feeling as well. But I guess things happen within their time. And what was most exciting about that was we were able to bring in 22 other First Nations creative that had some input into that runway.
Wow.
Whether it was through, accessories or the hand-painted boots that we did, or, the incredible millinery and so on, the models. So that was a collective of First Nations and non-First Nations coming together to produce something that was pretty amazing in the end, very emotional, even down to the music. One of our First Nations musicians did the music. That was actually pretty amazing. Then we were nominated for a number of other awards. But last year was a big year for us. I think we were nominated. So we won Indigenous Fashion Designer Award for Marie Claire. Australian Fashion Laureate, and
yes,
we were nominated for Fashion Award with Marie Claire, and
some prestigious awards there, and recognition. And I saw Dubai Fashion Week as well. You're involved in.
Yes,
Dubai.
we went to we did do a trade show in Dubai Fashion Week. Oh, and the other one that was pretty amazing, it was our first international runway, was when we did Milan in 2022.
Yeah.
So that running that runway on top of a newly launched sustainable cruise ship off the coast of Portofino was pretty amazing.
Okay, so for anyone tuning in, go to the landing page of the Ngali website. I was looking at that. What a stunning image. I'm thinking to myself, imagine being on that. Imagine being on that, or what is it, a cruise liner? That was just stunning, but what a phenomenal piece of content as well. I was just like captivated. So
it was pretty, it was pretty amazing. It was one of those times where you kind of look around and think, is this really happening? Yeah.
bit of a pinch me moment.
Yeah,
well, look, Denni, congratulations to you and your team on all of your achievements, because they are outstanding. That is just an outstanding portfolio of awards and achievements to have in, let's call it, a short period of time in the fashion industry. 5 years is it is a short period of time. They say it takes, 10 years to have an overnight success in our industry. So yeah, you're halfway, you're halfway there, but you've already achieved so much. Let's talk about the sales and marketing channels. How do you take Ngali to market? You've spoken about online, you've touched on wholesale. I'd love to go a little bit deeper there. But what have been the key channels, and how have you kind of phased in the focus of taking the brand to market?
Yeah, really for us, it's been mainly organic socials. Because of where we sit as a small business, what we're doing now is looking at, what's the investment strategy that we can put in place in order to move our business forward, because we've we've, I guess, invested our resources to a certain extent. Without investment, it's really difficult for us to go forward. And that's the case for many small businesses. But so therefore, with, I guess, financial constraints, we really have been doing a lot of what we do through organic socials, which is pretty amazing, I guess, in its own right as well.
Yeah.
But we have done some advertising, looking at what's going to work and how all of that's working, and we'll be doing a lot more of that. We're moving into that next phase because that's a critical component, obviously, of as an e-commerce brand of getting ourselves sort of out there. And then we have a growing sort of database, customer base, and so on that we communicate with through our email marketing campaigns as well.
Yeah.
But we need to do a lot more in the whole area of marketing.
I would imagine that the fashion weeks and the fashion festivals have really shone a light on the brand.
Yes. Yeah, that's a really good point as well. The fact that we've been in so many runways and so on, that's actually really helped us. So yes, it's not just the organic socials, but yeah, the runways as well.
Of course, it all works together because no doubt, from every event you participate in, you get amazing content. You're able to share that on your organic socials through your email marketing, anything that you do. So I guess it all works in together. Let's talk a little bit about wholesale. Which stores are stocking you, or an example of the types of stores that are stocking you, and what's the strategy and focus there for that channel?
Yeah, so really, our scarves are one of our best sellers because you can do so much with them, and we design them so that they do a whole lot of different things rather than just being a scarf. In terms of making them into scarf skirts or ponchos or how we do that, and we do that also so that it actually helps people to be able to bring something new and a piece of art into their wardrobes that they've already got. So that goes back a little bit to the sustainability we talked about earlier. So our scarves are stocked in some really beautiful resorts. So Longitude 131 in the Northern Territory. Voyagers have been a customer of ours. We've just taken on a new customer, the Paspali Hotel in Broome, National Australian Museum, with the National Gallery of Victoria, Powerhouse Museum, and then of course David Jones. We've done a David Jones capsule collection for the last 3 years, and that's come off the back of Australian Fashion Week. And then where we are moving now is to have a much more strategic approach to sort of like how we work with David Jones. They've been great support for us, and looking at how we move that forward. And so we're just starting to put our scarves into that. So all the other wholesale clients are for our scarves, and David Jones also take our clothing.
Yeah, love it. Great representation. Of course, to being, one of the leading department stores in Australia. And then, of course, strategically in those independent boutiques is absolutely perfect. So it sounds like there's a lot of scope for growth there, Denni.
Yes.
What about international? Have you had any international interest?
Yes. So there's some discussions going on at the moment in Europe and also in the Middle East. So we're not quite at the beginning of those conversations, but we're a little bit in, but with a little way to go. But again, this is the year for us for our wholesale strategy. So so that's where we'll be putting some really strong attention around that, to leverage where we're at. It's the obvious next sort of like step for us. Things like our scarves, make it easier for us to do. As well, and also to the simplicity of our collections, because our collections are not huge collections. As you probably would have noticed, we don't have a lot of product in any given collection, which makes it easier to manage.
Yeah, it's the quality over quantity, that's for sure. But the scarves are certainly iconic. And as you said, such a versatile piece and such a statement piece. And I love the way that you display them on your website as well, the way that you can see like the beautiful print kind of floating. So definitely check it out for anyone who's tuning in. There's just some gorgeous, I think, hero pieces in your collections, which, would be a standout. And I can see the attraction from a wholesale perspective as well, and could absolutely see your brand in Europe. So I think, and in the Middle East, I just think, there's so much scope there. But as businesses, we've got to, again, be strategic. There's so much more, obviously, you could do here in Australia. There's definitely a lot of growth for online, a lot of growth for the Australian Australian markets. It's like anything, it's prioritising where you put your time and focus to grow your brand. But the good thing is that to hear that there is opportunity and there's interest.
I think so. And I think the other thing that we're quite conscious of too is the retailer.
Yeah.
And so what we work on is we work on giving as much margin also to the retailer as possible as well. Like, and I think the retailer sometimes gets forgotten in the process of wholesale because, if you're wholesaling, you're thinking, yes, achieving this margin, this is what we want to do. But I think it's also really important to extend that out. And that's also too about building relationships, because if we can support retailers, let's face it, everybody is challenged.
Yep.
If we can support retailers with as much margin that we can give them, which maybe, and hopefully more than, what maybe they would normally get, then, that's actually a really good thing. And that comes under our ethos again, together we create, because everything that we do, we look at how do we do it collectively.
Yeah.
And retailers are really an important part of that, obviously. I mean, it's an obvious statement, but sometimes I think that they sort of like get forgotten in terms of all of the costs and the challenges and everything that they have. So if we're able to help that in any way too, that's important to us as well.
I think it's a really important point, and it's not, I don't think, a discussion that we often have about, obviously we talk about partnerships in business and it's got to be a win-win, but you're right, sometimes it's quite transactional from a wholesale perspective. And we do forget that we're putting, a beautiful brand in the hands of that retailer and it's their responsibility to sell that through to the customer. And we know there's a lot of costs that come along with that. When you are selling direct to consumer, you're accountable for the end-to-end, marketing costs that are associated. So I think, it's a really important part. And I love that. Again, it's a lovely extension of your brand ethos with the Together We Create. So yeah, thank you for sharing that. Now, Denni, I'd love to talk about the First Nations fashion landscape. It has experienced significant shifts and a lot of growth over the last few years. Could you perhaps share with our audience what you see as the most noteworthy changes and trends that you've observed, and how does Ngali position itself, amidst these changes and opportunities that are coming down the pipeline?
Whenever I go anywhere and First Nations creativity shows up, it's super exciting. So you go to any of the runways for National Indigenous Indigenous Fashion Projects and the Country to Couture that happens in Darwin, and you see the things coming down the runway, and it's like, oh my God, this is so incredible and so unique and so different sometimes in the landscape. And in sometimes what seems to be a sea of sameness, or that can be sort of quite homogenized. When you go into an emporium in Melbourne and you go into another one in Singapore and it's the same, or whether you turn up in London, and you're always looking for something that stands out, something that's actually just different. We used to have that on the high street, when you'd wander down a suburban street and you'd find these little shops that are just doing sort of like really different things, and it was exciting. And I think that First Nations fashion has an opportunity to really evolve and grow more in that space. And I was always conscious about, when you look at First Nation creativity, you often see it you could see it in a museum, you could see it in an art gallery, you could kind of see it on the runway. Like there'd been runways happening around in all different areas and remote areas around Australia, long before Ngali. But one of the things that was missing for me was that question, and now what? How do we turn all of that creativity or advance all of that creativity into commercial outcomes? So if we're looking at economic independence for our First Nations people, then how does that apply in the fashion context? So that, that if there is a runway, or if people are actually looking going, wow, that's amazing, sort of like artwork or whatever, how does that translate economically? And I think that is actually a really important thing. And it's starting now to happen more, because I think people are actually more conscious of it. And particularly in the fashion industry, or we could say the creative arts industry, or the industry of creativity within the First Nation space, there's so much opportunity. There's just so many incredible things that are happening. That's why I'm so super excited to see how the next sort of like 10 years evolves, because the more that we can shine the light on what's actually happening in the space, the more we get to elevate that creativity on an international stage. I think it's a really super exciting thing for Australia.
Yeah,
So
I would agree. Now I'm going to ask you a big question. What's missing? What's missing to make
I
this
think
happen?
I think
And I think from your own experience, even just seeing about the support perhaps you have received and the support that hasn't been available during your own journey, like what do we need to inject into this space to really support those emerging designers and brands?
yeah, and when I say this, I'm not saying that this doesn't it's not a challenge for all small businesses
Yeah.
that are looking to grow. But one of the things that we need definitely in the First Nation space is more financial support. We have the challenges, say, for example, female founders. We know that female founders get a tiny percentage of venture capital as opposed to what happens in the male space. You overlay that with being, a female, and then you overlay that with being a First Nation female or a First Nation male. So you overlay all of those things, and you can recognize how difficult it is actually to get financial support to grow businesses. And so that's definitely where Ngali has managed to bump and carry our way through sort of like 5 years. But like any business, you get to a certain point where you do need sort of like that investment to sort of take it to that next level. When you come back to, and a lot of people, I guess, don't understand this in the First Nation space, but I think we have to be conscious of the intergenerational lack of finance. We don't have ancestors that we've been able to build wealth around that can actually support us in actually moving forward. We don't have, generally, we don't have parents or grandparents or great-grandparents who've been allowed to build any type of wealth that can be leveraged as generations move forward, because our history is not that. And I think that most people don't realize that history. So when we look at how do we support First Nation businesses, that has to be a consideration, because there's been hundreds of years of, the incapacity to be able to earn income at the hands of government policy. So when we talk about what needs to happen in the First Nations space, whether it's in fashion or any other industry, we need more support to do that.
Yeah. I just think
And
that's a profound point that you've just made. I mean, that there's the message just there about the intergenerational wealth. Like you said, it's
yeah,
not there. There's not the money that's being passed down to be able to have, I guess, that, that assistance just to even get started, or to have that privilege to kind of have a go and go
yeah,
out on your own, because we know that, there's not a lot of, well, there's no security. There's a lot of instability when you're starting your own business.
yes,
So to
yeah,
be able to do that, to even think about doing that with no funds behind you, well, it just makes it impossible really without, an ecosystem of support from a
yes,
financial perspective, but then maybe a business development perspective, how to budget, how to plan, how to,
yeah,
really, I guess, formalize a business model and tap into the actual ecosystem of the industry as well. I think there's a lot that, as you said, people may not know that. I think there's a lot that a lot of us don't know. So I think education, Denni, is a huge piece. I
yes.
think from an industry perspective, the education is perhaps lacking, and we can certainly do better.
Yes, absolutely. And, if you look at, what happened with Ngali, say at Australian Fashion Week, when there was all of that incredible excitement about history being made, that would not have happened without the support of IMG, who gave us the opportunity to do that and gave us support behind it, and also to the sponsors that we got in Victoria for us to be able to do that. So, that could never have happened with Ngali on its own.
Yeah.
It can only happen when people go, no, you know what, and I can step up and I can support this.
Yeah.
And then the ramifications of that and the flow on effect of that is really significant,
Yeah.
because it opens up more pathways. More of our creatives think, well, yes, like I can do that too, I can step into that. Ngali becomes a business that can then leverage off that to be able to, put together, compelling case for export or, wholesale and so on. We get to employ more people and so on. So it's a rippling effect that just plays out in a very positive way when First Nations people get support to be able to, I guess, achieve, their full potential. And there's so much potential in our space.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that, Denni. I think, as I said earlier, we've got a lot to learn, and the more we can learn, the more support all of us can start to really put into this area. I just absolutely love, the First Nations and Indigenous designer space. I've been in awe just watching it over the last few years, and I've worked with some amazing Indigenous designers. So I know that there's always that, there's always a bit of lack around the support that's required to go to that next stage. So hopefully that's one of the big shifts that we see in the coming years, because as you've articulated very well, it is much needed. Now, Denni, I know we're getting to the pointy end now, and I just want to ask you a question I ask to all of my guests, because the podcast is fashion, business and mindset, and we know that without working on our self-care and our mindset in business, it's very hard to be in this game long term. So I know your role is very dynamic and demanding at times. Are there any practices around self-care, mindset, well-being that you utilize to allow you to operate at such an optimum level?
Yeah, it took me a long time to learn this, but when I learned it, it was actually great. And I think it came off the back that, they say you teach what you most need to learn. So when I was actually talking and running programs around personal energy management, I had to sort of learn a lot of things. And that was really about energy in and energy out. How much energy are we spending on something, and what are we doing to replenish that energy? So, that if you're spending energy on something that you can't change, or that is really upsetting, but whatever, that's energy. You don't have to do something else that's positive. So there's that part, and that ties into the picking up and putting down. That's a really powerful thing for me. It's actually, as a business owner, there's always things and problems that you're trying to solve, or things that you're trying to do. But sometimes I just have to, I think we all do have to say, you know what, I'm going to put this down right now. I'm putting this down now. I'll pick it up tomorrow, and you just sort of put it wherever it goes, and then you pick it up so that you're not carrying it. And that's been a really big thing for me. And the other really key thing for me is being out on country, because out on country, it doesn't matter what the weather is, but out on country, there's space, there's open space.
There'd be space. You'd feel grounded.
You get grounded, you feel, you can breathe, you can just be quiet. And for me, that's where, I get led to by my ancestors. That's when I can hear, because I have this thing, if something is actually too hard to do, it's not right.
Yeah.
Sometimes when it's too hard, you have to let that go and do something else. I'm not talking about letting go of your business, but it's sometimes, if we push too hard for an outcome, we think that that's the outcome we want. It's maybe not, that's not the outcome. That's not what the ancestors mean for you. That's not the outcome that they can see for you. So you let it go, and then other things appear.
Yeah, really, really tuning in and listening. Yeah. And I love the picking up and putting down, because I think it's so important. Sometimes you just need to walk away for a little bit and then perhaps come back to it. So some great insights there. Thank you for sharing. Now, Denni, in closing, I know you've already shared a lot around this, but in closing, what's your vision for the future of First Nations fashion? What excites you?
Oh, look, I get excited by the incredible people that are in the creative space, just doing amazing things. I get excited when, as First Nations, we really support each other and encourage each other and celebrate successes, individual successes within our mob. I think that, the energy that comes from when we get together in the show of sort of solidarity, support, enthusiasm, a sense of excitement. I can kind of see that. I can see that growing, and I'm super excited to have any sort of part in that, as it shows itself over the coming years.
How exciting. Thank you so much. What a beautiful message to end on. Denni, thank you so much for your time and your generosity of sharing your journey with us all today. Congratulations again to you and your team for everything you've achieved in what I would say is a short period of time. We'll be watching this space and can't wait to see you at a fashion show soon.
Okay, thank you so much, Elizabeth. It's so nice to be with you.
Thank you so much for listening to the Fashion Business Mindset podcast. We'd love to keep connected. You can find us on Instagram and Facebook at Fashion Equipped. Head to our website fashionequipped.com.au. If you've enjoyed this episode, please share this podcast with others, hit subscribe, leave us a rating and review. Let's do this together. Let's make the fashion business your business.
This is a Guide Your Light network production, creating podcasts with purpose.